Welcome aboard, mateys, and today we're going to be creating a respawn and level system. I'm going to start with the respawn system because I already created the code for destroying the pirate ship if the health gets to 0 in the pirate ship blueprint. But I need to respawn the pirate ship from a different blueprint because if the pirate ship is destroyed, then it won't run any code to respawn itself. And I thought I should give my ship the ability to respawn before implementing a level system. Okay, that was hard to see, but I think it did respawn because it got bigger after a little clip. So we can add a delay in here and change the size so that it spawns at the same size every time. Okay, so now that you can actually see the ship respawn, the next thing I want to do is make it blink. We can use the opacity setting in the sprite color of my pirate ship to make a fading effect for when it respawns. So inside my hero pirate ship's blueprint, we can do that by getting the sprite color and using a timeline to change the opacity while we play the game. Inside the timeline, we can add keyframes that go from 1 to 0 and repeat, which will control the actual fading effect. And with all our keyframes created, I'm going to hook the timeline up to all the color channels, including the opacity, because if I just did the opacity, the ship will look like it's clipping, and if I use all the color channels, it looks more like it's fading, which is what I want. So the fading effect seems to be working, so now I just want to make sure it only happens when the ship respawns. So after the code for the ship to respawn, I'm going to create a variable and set it to true, and use that as a condition to say that only when that is true, then do the blinking effect. Nice. Okay, the last thing we're going to do with the respawn system is make all the enemy ships die when we die. The reason for that is so that when you respawn, you have a chance to gather yourself and upgrade more before you're attacked, because you will actually keep all the doubloons you've gained before you died. Alright, so now that the enemies die and our pirate ship respawns, it's time to move on to making the level system. So what I was planning to do was to create a widget that would have a slider bar, and when the slider would reach the top of the bar, you would reach a new level. I'm just going to name this widget Level Distance Bar. So now with the widget created, we can go inside of it and make the actual slider. Alright, so it will just take me a minute to get the slider in the right location and size it up, and then I'll be right back. Okay, and with the slider bar in the right location, we are going to use code to change the value of the slider automatically. First, I'm going to actually add the widget we created to the viewport so that you can see it when you start the game, which is probably one of the most important steps, and yet the one I forget the most. So this is how it looks so far. Now that you will be able to see it, we are going to actually create the functionality for the slider to go up. For this, we will be using a timeline and setting the value of the slider to the timeline so that the timeline will be in full control of the slider's movement. We want the slider to go up, and then once it reaches the top, start back at the bottom, but say that you made it to a new level. So, now that the timeline is created, we are going to set the value. I have it set so that the timeline will make the value go from 0 to 1 in 2 seconds, which I know is too fast, but I just want to see if it works before I fiddle around with it too much. Alright, let's see if it works. And it does! Awesome! That wasn't too hard, which hopefully means it won't give me a ton of trouble in the future, but now we can make it so the slider restarts if you die, so that you actually have a penalty for getting destroyed. So we're going to make a boolean and set it to true after you were destroyed, and at the start we'll ask if it is true to know if we should restart the slider or play it normally. We are also going to set the restart slider variable back to false after you respawn, so that you don't stay at 0 forever and never get to a new level, which will be a game-breaking bug if I don't fix it now. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, so he's shooting at you and you die and the slider is working, yay! Now I'm going to move on to something a little more artsy. So I'm going to try to change the way the slider looks. This is going to be temporary and we will change it later, but I want to try to make it look a little better. So we're just going to speed through the process here so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. So now that the bar for the slider bar is finished, we are going to get it into Unreal by exporting it from here and then importing it into Unreal. Okay, so now that that is in, we can replace our bar with it. Now we can take a look at it when it's in our world. So as I said, it will be changed later, but I think it does help me see it better. Now I just want to change up that slider. Okay, so now I can export this and get it into Unreal. And there it is. Yeah, that's not going to be the permanent solution. Later I will be putting more thought into how to make this have a more pirate style. It also changes when you hover over it, but that's easily fixed. Now for the last stage. We need to actually make the number that goes up to tell us that we're at a new level. We are going to do that by making an integer variable that adds 1 to itself when the slider reaches the top, or when value equals 1. So here's how that works. You check if the value of the slider is greater than or equal to 1, then you add 1 to the level, so that says you reach level 2. Of course, after that, we want to restart the slider so that you can run through the next level. So set restart slider to true, and then after a delay, we'll set it to false. Now we're going to work on replacing the text that's on screen. What we just made was the code behind it to make it count up, but this is when we actually display that on the HUD. So we are going to get this level text variable, which has the word level stored inside of it, and we are going to use an append node to add the level number after level text. Then use set text to set that as the text that will show up on screen. Alright, so let's take a look at it. Okay, so we obviously have a problem. That's probably because I plugged the level text into the append node, but I don't want to do that. I just want to write level in the append node and use that to replace any text in level text. And so after we're done with that, we can just see how it looks on screen. Okay, so it's at least displaying properly. Now we can see if it actually goes up a level. Nope, it's hopeless. Okay, so it looks like the event construct at the start of our code should be replaced with an event tick, so that the game is constantly checking if we need to change what the text is displaying. That's probably why it wouldn't change, because it would only check when you began the game. Alright, so I will just let that slider go up and upgrade myself so that I don't die. Give it a second. Hey, in the hard days it works! Sorry, I couldn't help it. Not sure if I'll do that again though, but I think we are actually done. Coming up next, we will be making it so that you actually have to pay for upgrades with doubloons, so you cannot just click them. And we will also be doing a full HUD revamp, because I think this HUD can look a little bit better. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'm so glad you came along on this adventure. See you later!